Hey guys, welcome back. Daniel Ndukwu here. In the last video, in the first part of this $9 billion startup fiasco, I walked you through how the company was started and how they had raised over $40 million without a working prototype and without receiving any tangible revenue over the course of about 5-6 years. When I left off, they had just hired a new chief operating officer named Sunny Balwani. This was Elizabeth Holmes' then boyfriend, and he did have a background in business and engineering. In this video, I'm going to show you how things started to hit the fan after they hired Sunny and Theranos started to become an iffy company, if you will. Let's dive in. So shortly after hiring Sunny Balwani in 2009, in 2010, Theranos approached Walgreens and Safeway about a potential partnership to put their machines in their stores. Now, at this point, I want to make it very clear that Theranos didn't have a working prototype. After 6 or 7 years of development, there was no product to show. As they approached Walgreens and Safeways for this deal, valued at tens of millions of dollars, Theranos had to actually go back to the drawing board and create a new product that could handle more diagnostic tests. They were able to get some kind of memorandums of understanding, basically a handshake deal with these companies. So based on that, they now went back and raised another $45 million. So if you're keeping tabs, they're at about $90 million and they still don't have a working product. It's all good as biotech is very expensive to develop a product in the biotechnology field. No problems there. So the next year, 2011, a year after getting those supposed deals with Safeways and Walgreens, Theranos released a new product called the Mini Lab. Now this was just 1 year later, 2011, after failing to produce a product for the past 7 years. That's by the way. So in 2011, they released this Mini Lab. So when they released this Mini Lab in 2011, a lot of other things started happening. At this point, Elizabeth Holmes was styling herself as the female Steve Jobs or even the next Steve Jobs. So she ran into George Shultz. If you're not familiar with that name, he's a former U.S. Secretary of State, which means he's a super influential guy. So within a month of meeting George Shultz, she actually added him to their board of directors. And over the next few years, George Shultz would personally recruit different high-powered executives to the board of Theranos. They were at one point called an all-star board of directors. People like Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State during the time of Richard Nixon, Richard Kovacevic, that is the former CEO of Wells Fargo, military generals, U.S. admirals. I mean, the board of directors for Theranos, even though they didn't have much industry expertise, they had clout. They can get shit done. Also, after they released the Mini Lab, they ran a pilot for Safeways, and the chief medical director of Safeways raised concerns that there were discrepancies in the results from Theranos' testing. But the CEO basically brushed it off as, no worries, bro, we're going to make millions of dollars anyways. A year later, he was fired.
It is what it is. It is what it is.
That's another story for another time. While this was happening, they finished brokering the details of the deal with Walgreens to launch the Mini Lab in dozens of locations, and Theranos continually missed deadlines. Now that's a big red flag. So you remember all those high-powered board members that George Shultz recruited? They started to come into play. So in 2012, when Theranos tried to woo a lieutenant colonel named David Shoemaker about using their products in the military, he raised flags about their regulatory strategy to the FDA, which prompted a surprise visit from the Center for Medicaid and Medical Services. Now, when they arrived on the premises, this Sunny guy, Balwani, who's the president and the COO, told them that their things were still in development. They weren't ready for prime time. So the people at Medicaid went back. After this happened, Lieutenant Colonel Shoemaker basically said, man, we don't want anything to do with it. And that's when James Mattis, a former 4-star Marine Corps general and the Secretary of Defense under President Trump, started fighting Shoemaker for the ability to use their products within the Army. So over time, Shoemaker really didn't have much of a choice, so he agreed to a limited experiments within the Army. So you see how those board members are coming into play. And that's just one instance of how they've use their political weight to get things done. So later in 2013, the Mini Lab, nicknamed the 4S after the iPhone because, she's obsessed with Steve Jobs, was officially launched. While she was launching it, there was a lot of protests for scientists within the company saying that it simply wasn't ready. In the same month that the Mini Lab was launched, Walgreens invested $50 million into Theranos. If you're keeping track, that's about $140, $150 million worth of investment without a working product, mind you. Within 6 months of the release of the Mini Lab and the $50 million investment from Walgreens, Theranos received another $200 million in investment. Mind you, and I really, really want to stress this fact, Theranos doesn't have a working product, but they've received over $300 million in investments at this point. Fine, cool. And they're valued at over $1 billion. That's by the way. After the $200 million investment round, the media really started to take note. Forbes valued the company at over $9 billion, which they later revised to $4.5 billion, which was still wrong because they don't have a working product, But that's by the way. Fortune called Holmes up and she graced the cover of one of their issues. 2014 was their best year yet. Early 2015, Holmes was profiled by Inc. and she was called the next Steve Jobs. The plot thickens. So in 2015, shortly after the feature in Inc., things started to unravel. John Carreyrou, an investigative journalist for the Wall Street Journal, got an anonymous tip from someone. He then called one of the medical lab directors at Theranos and he told him about some of the shady practices the company was engaging in. He got interested, and over the next few months, he started to investigate Theranos more closely. But unfortunately, most of the world had no idea about the skeletons hidden in the closet of Theranos, and as a result, they got another $348 million in investor funding within 2015, mind you. Within July of the same year, 2015, he got his first FDA approval. In October 2015, my boy John Carreyrou was done investigating, and he dropped his story in the Wall Street Journal. He talked about the unethical practices and the fact that they don't really have a working product and that they're delivering false results to patients, that they collect way more blood than they need, and a litany of problems associated with Theranos. That's when things really started to go crazy. The FDA released a document that said Theranos is shipping medical devices in unapproved containers. The deal with Safeway fell through in the next month, and they were on thin ice with Walgreens, who had invested $50 million in the company. And while all these things were going on, Theranos was operating their own clinics, namely in Arizona, with limited capacity, and handing out false results to patients because their technology didn't work. Now, mind you, at this point, they've received about $700 million in investor funding. And in early 2016, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare actually released a statement that said Theranos Labs posed an immediate threat to put patients' lives in jeopardy. Now, this is the same group that came to their labs for a surprise visit, and Mr. Sunny Balwani said that their products weren't ready. And in April of 2016, the SEC started to investigate the company. In May, Mr. Balwani fled the company. He didn't flee the country, but he fled the company. In June, Walgreens ended its relationship with Theranos. And then in July, Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes personally were banned from the lab testing industry for 2 years. And then in August, since they were banned from running their own clinic, they shifted the company entirely to developing the Mini Lab, that product that they were supposed to develop for the Safeway and Walgreens deal. Yeah, they started to focus all of their time and attention on that. But by the end of 2016, Theranos had closed all of its labs and laid off hundreds of employees across the country. In 2017, things got really crazy. Walgreens, smarting from its $50 million investment and basically being lied to, launched a lawsuit based on breach of contract. Patients in Arizona filed lawsuits. Investors filed lawsuits. Most of the All-Star board fled the company. Theranos laid off even more employees. So they're basically being sued from every direction. And I know for a fact that for the lawsuits in Arizona against the patients, they settled for millions of dollars. And then in 2018, the SEC filed a lawsuit for massive fraud against Theranos and Holmes personally. In June 2018, Holmes stepped down as the CEO. And then in September 2018, the company announced plans to close or cease operations. At that time, by the end of 2018, the value of Theranos and Holmes as well was zero. What a 15-year ride. So I hope this has shown you that, one, Silicon Valley investors, they're not infallible. They make the wrong bets all the time. And two, many of these companies, even though there are a lot of regulations trying to protect us as individuals, many of these companies kind of slip under the radar and produce massive, unethical organizations and fraud, and they really damage everyone involved. So it's really important to, step up, look at the company, and really make your own decisions. We trust the system, but blind faith can be dangerous. So that's it for this video. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm, and I will see you in the next one.